Hey there YouTube, welcome back for another Indomitus painting video. This week we are taking a look at how I paint up my Dark Angels Lieutenant from the Indomitus set. So first of all, I've gone ahead and primed the model with Chaos Black spray paint from Games Workshop, and I'm now going in with a thinned down Caliban green. And what I'm trying to do is build this up towards the top of the shoulder pad here, as well as the rest of the armour, just getting thin coats on and starting on the area that I want to be darkest and moving towards the lightest area, so that as the paint is slightly as the paint is thinned down, it's going to pool up a little bit. And so the idea is that where you pull the brush away is where the pooling will end, and that's where you'll get your most opaque colour. So the idea is to fade from the black into an almost opaque Caliban green. So just going around all of the areas on here with this same method, going from the light green, the watered down green on the black, building it up with multiple layers. You can see on the shoulder pad as it's dried here, we are looking at almost still black, and then I'll go back over that, starting a little bit higher than I did before, a little bit more into the light area than I did, and this will give a nice blend from the black up into the bright green. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now that I've got the Caliban green up to the tone that I want it, I'm now going in with an almost 50-50 mix of Caliban green and Warpstone glow. This is leaning a little bit more towards the Warpstone glow, and this has been thinned down almost to a glaze consistency similar to what I had with the Caliban green, but a little bit less water. And as with the Caliban green, I'm doing the same thing, just working from just shy of where I want the highlights to be, and then working my way up into that highlight area, focusing on any areas where the light would catch the most. So that's things like the tops of the feet, the top of his helmet, as well as the sort of the top side areas, the top portion of his shoulder pad, the tops of his arms, things like that. Now this isn't edge highlighting, this is the next stage. As he's a lieutenant, I'm painting him up similar to how I would a character model, so it's, you know, a little bit more than just the standard dry brushing that I gave for the regular Marines, the intercessors in the previous video. If you haven't checked that video, I'll put a little card up in the corner now, and you can go back and check how to speed paint intercessors with a little bit of detail to them. But for this model, we're going a little bit more detail to it. So yeah, just getting this green up. It does look a little bright on the video, especially as it goes down, but that does dull down a little bit as it dries. It's only because it's wet paint, it always tends to go on a little bit brighter. All I'm doing on the vertical pieces, like the legs here, is putting almost like a highlight reflection down an area of the leg, and then everywhere else is just along, like I say, flat surface areas, including up to edges. And with the shoulder guard, it will be sort of that top third of the shoulder guard, and I will build this up over, again, 4 or 5 layers, putting back each time to build that up to a brighter green. I'm not looking to get a full Warpstone glow with this. Like I say, this is the 50-50-ish mix, but we do want to get up so that there is some highlight up on those brighter areas. So I'll get on with this and we'll come back once I'm done. Okay, so next up I'm going to go back in with some non-oil and a fine, very fine tip brush, a small brush. I think this is a 00. It's just a cheap hobby brush, but it does have a nice point to it. And all I'm doing is just going back in and essentially black lining all of the areas where I want a bit of shadow. So anywhere in the grooves and gaps between armour, particularly these pieces around the back of the legs and such. Anywhere sort of like the step down on his foot plates from the higher one onto the toes, I'll line that step down there. Around the mohawk part of the helmet, around the wrist guards, anything like that, anywhere where armour overlaps, I will apply this just to give a little bit of a dark area there. Now this is thinned down, so it does, or this is a shade paint, so obviously with it being watery, it does get right into recesses easily, especially with using such a small brush. Means that I don't end up with a huge area lined along the green. It is just a very thin line along all of those areas that are to be dark. As you can see around the helmet here, I'm just going around any of these where armour or pieces of armour meet up with another piece, a flat area, and just applying a thin line of this. Now I'm not letting this pull up in any places. This does have a little bit of trying to think of the word, the paint grips a little bit. It doesn't want to run fully into recesses unless you pull it. If you go and slap a blob down somewhere, then it's going to run. This is being applied very thinly, so there's not enough to run. It's just gripping the model or the paint so that you can leave essentially a stain mark there. You can see here I'm just using it as a glaze just to darken up the inside of the armour where I wanted that area to be just a little bit darker than what it was. A little tip for things like this, if you find that you've gone too bright with an area or a model, then you can always go back over with a very thin glaze of a darker tone. For example, I'm doing Dark Angels green here. If I had gone too bright, then I could go over the piece essentially with the null oil as I'm doing here and darken it up, or something like a thinned down Caliban green, or even something slightly darker. And if you glaze over, then because it's extremely thinned down, it's going to tint the colour rather than change the colour. So you can essentially add shadow over the top of highlighting with a very thin glaze. So nice little way to correct areas if you've gone too dark. Just brighten it up a little bit, or darken it down a little bit, I should say, with a glaze. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a tick. Okay, so now that the green is almost done to completion, just minus some final highlights, I'm now taking some Xandri dust and I'm going to apply a few thin layers of this over the robe area, as well as any parchment from the purity seals and things like that, purity scrolls. And I'll apply this until I get an almost opaque Xandri dust over the top. I may have it thinned a little bit too light here. I did start off wanting to try and use the black as a natural shade shadow, but it just looked a bit patchy, so I ended up going back over and just doing the whole thing with a flat coat of Xandri dust. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a sec. And with the Xandri dust applied, I'm now going in with a slightly thinned down Ushapti bone, and again the same as I did with the green, I'm just working in thin layers and building up from that Zandri dust to the Ashapti bone. And I'm mainly focusing this on any areas where the light would hit the most. I'm imagining that my light is coming from the top above the model, slightly to the left, so that all the highlights are a little bit more on the left side, and then the shadow on the right side of, you know, deeper folds and things like that. You can see on some areas of the cloak there that I did let that black undertone show through the Zandri dust a little bit, so that it does give a bit more of a natural shadow, as well as the armor plates that I'm just applying this to here. So again, same as before, I'm using multiple layers, just building this up and trying to get it to, you know, a smooth blend from that darker tone to the lighter tone until it's at the you know, a level that I'm happy with. So again, I'll go on and get on with this, and we'll be back in just a bit. Right, now that the robes are almost done, I'm now going in with some Balthazar gold, and I'm applying this to all of the sort of the gold areas basically. So that's the emblems and pieces that he has hanging from his belt here, as well as the skull and sort of little triangle pieces on his knee guards, as well as the trim on his shoulder guards, along with any other small skulls and sort of embellishments and things like that. The look I'm going for with this will be a true metallic metal look, so it will be using a couple of different golds, a wash and a silver for edge highlighting, just to give the gold a little bit more of a realistic look rather than a flat gold paint look. But I'll explain that as we go along. So I'll get on with applying this gold, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now the gold areas have their base coat down, it's time to paint up some of the, or to paint up the pouches, the holsters, and the sword scarab and things like that. And to start with, I'm going with some Rhinox hide and just getting a nice clean base coat of that down. So a couple of thin layers is enough to get some good coverage with this. But that'll be over the holster, the pouches on his back, the like I say, the scabbard for his sword, and I think that was about it for this one. But I'll get on with this and we'll be back shortly. Okay, so once the Rhinox hide is down, I'm now going to give the leather a bit of a worn leather look, and for this I'm taking some Scrag Brown, and to start with I'm just edge highlighting all of the leather areas, and this is a little bit of a thicker line, it's not quite a full edge highlight. And once I'm done lining the sides of everything, I'll then go back over and with a slight sort of stroking motion, I'll pull in from those lines into the flat areas of the leather. And this is to represent any, as the leather is dried and worn on those edges, that it's started to split a little bit and wear into some of that more sort of flatter central leather area. And it's just to give it a little bit of a worn look, so it's not so much of a highlight as more of a cracked leather area. But I'll get on with doing this over all of the areas that I'd previously done with the Rhinox hide, and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so now I'm just going back over that Scrag Brown with some Ushapti bone, and all I'm doing is just adding small touches of highlights within that scrag brown, and this is to represent the most dried out part of the leather, reflecting some light, just to give it that little bit more of a worn look. So this is using broken up lines, sort of dotted about. This doesn't go too much into the flatter areas. This is just used more on the edges, and concentrated more around areas that would be particularly more worn. So areas like the flap of the pouch, the hard edges, the outside edges, and things like that. You'll note that I did go a little bit into the flat area, but it wasn't a huge amount. It's just a few very small dots with a little bit of the paint that's left on the brush, so it's not as harsh as the outside. It's almost barely noticeable. And once this is done, I will then go over all of the leather areas with a thin down glaze of Rhinox hide, just to tone down that Ushapti bone a little bit, and to sort of blend it all together and tie it all in to the leather, and that will be the pouches finished. So we'll cut away now and come back to just after I've done the leather glaze stage. Okay, so now that that's done, we're moving on to the red areas, and for this I'm taking some Mephiston red and applying this to the wax seal on the purity seals. And whoopsie daisy, you'll notice on the shoulder guard there I've got and splodged a bit of Ushapti bone, so you'll notice later on that will be gone, as obviously I will go over and redo that entire shoulder pad from the start. But anyway, I apply some of this Mephiston red over the, like I say, the purity seals. I've also gone ahead and finished started the lenses, and for that all I did was took some white scar, carefully lined it into the lenses, let that dry, and then applied 2 or 3 layers of non-oil with a fine detail brush, just lining around the outside of the lenses and letting it seep into that recess, but not letting it pool. Let that dry and then go over it 2 or 3 more times, and what that will do is darken around the lens but leave that nice white top of the lens, you know, the bulge of the lens in the center there. But as for the red here, that's obviously all the purity seals and his weapon. So I'll cut now just ahead, and you can see what this will look like once the weapon is done. And there's me noticing the mark. Okay, so I'm now going in with some lead belcher and just painting up all of the silver areas of the pistol here. So that's obviously all of the front area, sort of the barrel area, and the top sight. As this is a plasma pistol, the coils for the plasma will obviously be painted with a blue glow effect, so I'm leaving them black for now, and just concentrating this around the sort of the front and bottom portion of the pistol, as well as the magazine clip and the back portion that's just above the handle there, with the back sight as well. But you can see there where I've gone over with the Mephiston red to get the red areas. So if you are following along or using this for inspiration on whether it's painting Dark Angels or painting, you know, red weapons, red plasma pistols, anything like that, then hopefully this will be of some use to you and give you a good idea on where to place some of those colours that will break up the pistol, rather than having just one big black pistol or big red pistol. You know, the colours are a little bit broken up by this metallic areas and black areas. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so I'm now going around and highlighting any of the black areas. So for example, the inside of his elbows, the armpits, the back of his knees and his belt, you know, things like that. And for this I'm just using some Eshin grey straight out of the pot with maybe a little bit of water on the brush. You know, I don't want this thin, as it does need to sit on those edges and not seep down into the recesses. And I am literally just, you know, with a fine detail brush, just highlighting all of those edges. So obviously you can just see I'm trying to get along the belt here, and then it'll be the back of the knees itself. But anyway, I'll get on with that and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so back to the green armour. I'm now taking some Warpstone Glow and I'm just edge highlighting some of those hard edges where the light is most going to hit and pick off. So that will be any areas that come to a point or a corner of some kind, as long as they are not under another body part or part of armour. So as long as they're exposed, then they'll have this highlight. This will also be along the top curves of his shoulder pauldron, so the hard edges there, the outside edges of the foot, as you can see I'm doing here, just along the top, and then things like the edges of the mohawk, lining the boots, edges of the gloves, and you know, areas like that. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. Right, and with those edge highlights done in the Warpstone Glow, I'm now taking some Moot Green and just very carefully edge highlighting just very fine spot areas in the brightest point where the sun or the light would reflect the most, and just cause an almost, you know, vibrant bright area of highlight. If I was doing this as a metallic look, then it would probably be a white that I would use, as when you look at things that light is reflecting on, you tend to come to that finest, most concentrated point of light where it looks almost white. But as this is a flat colour and not so much a metallic armour, the highlights are still bright and vibrant. So for this I'm just using the Moot Green. And like I say, this is just on very small areas, usually the very top curve of, you know, curved areas, or where 2 points will meet on a corner. Again, anywhere that is almost parallel to the ground. But I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a few. And welcome back. So I'm now taking some Evil Sun's Scarlet, and again this is slightly thinned down, and I'm just highlighting the Mephiston red with this, focusing on the top of the pistol as well as any of those hard edges. I'm not looking to get as smooth a blend with this, as the two colours are a little bit similar to already, especially when thinned down. So yeah, I'm just looking to get some nice clean edge highlights. You'll also note that I've gone ahead and painted the coils on the plasma area there, the plasma coils. I've done them in white, and then using a little bit of thin down white, I've gone just over the edge onto the red area to give the effect of a a glow, and that's in preparation for the coils themselves to be painted. So I'll get on with doing this red, which I'll also apply to the purity seals and anything else that is red, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so I'm now taking some Retributor armour and using this as a mid-tone slash highlight for all of the Balthazar gold areas, so anything that was done with the Balthazar gold. And I'm just picking off areas, like I say, the majority of the metal with this gold colour, focusing obviously more where the light would catch, and then leaving that Balthazar gold as a recessed shadow or under shadow, and you know, just in some of the darker areas. And this will give it a little bit more of a realistic metallic look, rather than that flat metallic gold paint look. So again, this is on all of the emblems that he has: the skull on his knee pad, the smaller skull on his helmet, as well as the gold trim around his shoulder pads, and also the gold emblem on his right shoulder pad. So you'll notice here that I'm going around the top area, trying obviously not to get it onto that green, and then focusing it down in the centre of the shoulder pad here, and then the same on the top, focusing it on the peak of the curve, and then as it comes down to the side, I'll stop a little bit short of the corners, so it adds just a gold highlight to the top areas. So I'll get on with this, and I'll be on back in a sec. Okay, so for the plasma coils, I'm just simply taking some Ahriman blue that has been thinned down with a little bit of Lamian medium, and I'm just painting this over the coils, and obviously that's going to tint the white with the blue, and then leave that little bit brighter blue or darker blue, depending on how you look at it, in the recesses. And then I'm just taking it slightly onto the weapon itself, just to give that plasma glow effect to it. Right, so I'm now going in with some Rhinox hide, and I'm just very carefully lining in some battle damage, you know, some chipped paint areas, some scratches and things like that on areas of armour that will be most exposed to either the elements or you know, incoming battle damage and things like that. So obviously a lot of wear on the boots, the lower legs and the knees, and then obviously a little bit on the shoulder guards and helmet and things like that. You'll also notice that I did take some warpstone glow and do the same effect with that to give the highlight, and then I'm going into those scratches or those paint marks with this Rhinox hide, and that will give the impression of highlight with some paint or some armour missing, so you know, a scratch with a highlight. And I find it's easier to paint the highlight in and then add the darker to the middle of that highlight, rather than trying to do it the other way around. I think that it sits a lot better with the darker painted on top of the light, rather than trying to place a thin line up against that that dark scratch. So if you make a thin line with the highlight colour, and then inside that thin line you can then go in with a line of the darker colour, so in this case the Rhinox hide, and then that will leave just a small outline of highlight around the edge without actually having to, you know, highlight anything. Okay, so next up I'm just taking some Othwan Grey, and again going over those highlights that I did with the Eshin Grey, just adding a very small final center highlight, just to give the lightest area there. And obviously this will be done over any of those areas that had the Eshin grey done previously, and obviously I am leaving some of that Eshin grey showing. You'll also notice that I have done the lenses on this. I did that at the same time that I did the Evil Sun's Scarlet Red, and that was just a case of thinning the red down, carefully painting it onto the white area, and then lining that once again with Nuln Oil once that had dried, and then just applying a very small dot of white highlight towards the back of the lens. So again, I'm just taking some white scar now and just edge highlighting these coils, just picking off the two outside edges just to brighten those coils up a little bit more, and then going back in between them and around the weapon, just touching some of that up and throwing the model around, but just touching that up with some of the Ahriman blue just to give a bit more of a glow effect on the outside there. Alright, and finally I'm just taking some Pallid Witch Flesh and just edge highlighting and then filling in some of the area of these purity seals, leaving a little bit of that Zandri dust and Ashapti bone showing in some of the folds and the creases. And then obviously the same with the banner piece on his arm here. You'll also notice that I've attached the sword, as that is now finished. Obviously the gold areas were done in the same way as the gold on his armour. So I'll just get on with this and we'll come back to painting the shield. The backpack I won't bore you guys with, as that is done exactly the same way as the green armour and the gold areas. I'm sure by now you guys know how to paint a backpack, but we will go through the process for the shield. So I'll be back in just a bit, guys. And welcome back. So with the Marine himself finished, it's now time to work on the shield. Now, as you noticed, I've gone ahead and painted the inside of the shield in the colours that I want. That would be the Caliban green and the metal, before attaching it to the miniature. I then attached it just as a push fit, not with any super glue or anything just yet, just in case I need to take it off to paint up the inside or touch up the inside. But I'm now going over in pretty much the same way as I did with the armour, using the very thin down Caliban green and applying that over all of the green areas in the centre of the shield, focusing more towards the outside edges, and then as the shield has a slight curve to it, concentrating that a little bit more just in the centre portion of the shield. And like I say, I'll do about 3 or 4 coats with this, and until it's, you know, almost that Caliban green, but just slightly darker in those recesses and, you know, those kind of areas. But I'll get this done and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, and with that first layer of green done, I'm now coming in with the 50-50-ish mix of Caliban green and Warpstone glow, and this is going to be my my main focus highlight area. So as I mentioned earlier, just focusing along the centre and also the outside edges of the shield. So obviously in the case of the top, that's the top outside edge, and then down the sides, and then just near the bottom half of the cross there. Obviously there's not enough gap to do the outside edge plus the centre, it's pretty much the same thing, so that is just a straight colour down there. But yeah, so the same as I did with the green armour, it's just a case of layering this up with these thin down glazes and concentrating it on those areas where I want it to be the brightest. So as you can see, I'm just pulling it into that center area, and then the outside edges. So we'll get on with this and come back to paint the gold. Okay, so now coming in with that Balthazar gold, and you'll notice I've finished the backpack in the same way, and I'm just applying this to the outside trim and also the center cross portion. So essentially this shield is gold and green, with the exception of the banner piece that's just in front of just across the cross there. So I'll get on with the painting this gold, and we'll be back in just a bit for the next level of highlight. Okay, so I'm now going in with some Nuln oil, and as with the armour, I'm just getting this into the recess between the green and the gold, just to darken that recess up and you know, get a nice gap between the two. And then I'll also use this to line up against the center cross, because it is essentially on top of the green plate, and that will add just a little bit of shadowing around there as well, which will, you know, separate the colours. So the brush isn't quite as thin as the one used previously, but these gaps are a little bit wider, so obviously I can get away with the slightly bigger brush. And you'll notice in a few areas I will touch that onto the green the same as I did before, just to add some shadow recess, or some shadow in, and darken up some of that green a little bit. But I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now using the finer brush and some Warpstone Glow, I'm just edge highlighting the shield right up against where that black line is, before it meets the gold. And this will be done around all of the edges, apart from obviously where it meets up against the gold cross, but it'll be all the outside edges with the Warpstone Glow here. So I'll get on with this and we'll be back in just a bit. And finally some moot green point and edge highlights, just carefully dotted in and focused on certain areas and points, like I say, usually where two corners meet, and obviously the upper portions, just to give that final bright light edge glow to the green on the shield here. Okay, so I'm now going into the purity seals, or the wax portion of the purity seals, and again this is some Mephiston red, and to try and cut the video a little bit shorter, this is done in the same way. This is the Mephiston red, and then that will be edge highlighted with the Evil Sun's scarlet, and then the scrolls and the banner themselves will be done with some Ushapti bone, some Zandri dust, followed by some Ushapti bone, and then some pallid witch flesh for the main colour of it, in exactly the same way as I did with the previous scrolls. But we'll come back once those are done and have a look at some of those finishing little details towards the end. Okay, so with the gold highlighted as with the gold on the armour, I'm now going to go over all of the gold areas on the model with some Stormhost silver, and much like I used the moot green, I'm just going to pick off some very fine highlights, edge highlights, and this is obviously where the sun would be the most reflected. So as I said, mentioned earlier in the video, as it's a metallic, this is going to have an almost white look to it, and so silver has the best look for that. So anywhere where you would look at metal normally, particularly a coloured type of metal, where a harsh light would be concentrated on it, that brightest point is almost always white looking. So in the sense of gold, you don't want to use a white because obviously it's a matte colour. So silver is the best focus highlight for gold. So some Stormhost silver, picking off some edge highlights, and like I say, this is over all of the gold areas on the model, including on the lieutenant himself. But obviously I'm starting here with the shield, as that is where I had finished. So I'll get on with that, and we'll be back in just a bit. Right, and finally I'm just taking some Agrax Earthshade and applying this to the chest emblem, and just trying to focus this so that it goes between each of the feathers and obviously in the eyes of the skull and things like that. I don't want this pooling up in any particular place. I just want this the same as I did with the black lining. I'm just doing it with the Agrax Earthshade, and then once that is applied and dried, I will then go back in with some Ushapti bone and just very carefully edge highlight each of the individual feathers. And then obviously I'm just using a little bit down here just to darken up some of the recesses on the cloth, and using it, like I said earlier, almost like a glaze, just to add a little bit of shade and shadow in there without adding any sort of stark contrast. So I'll get on with this and the bit of highlighting, and then I'll get him on a base, and we'll come back when he is finished. And there he is, guys, with his completed base and in all his glory. So once again, guys, thank you ever so much for joining me. It was a pleasure painting this model, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that like button below, and if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing for more videos focusing on the Indomitus series every Wednesday or Thursday, as well as the Mortal Realms magazine series every Monday. So until next time, remember guys, take it easy and keep painting those minis. Thanks a lot for watching.